Welcome into the Cam Rogers Show on this Friday morning. How we doing, ladies and gentlemen? I am Cam Rogers. Check me out on Twitter at Mr. Rogers99. Well, the dark underbelly of NCAA basketball just got a ray of sunshine this morning. A bombshell report was released by Yahoo Sports. Documents and bank records obtained in discovery during the federal investigation into the underbelly of college basketball detail in meticulous fashion the expenditures of prominent former NBA agent Andy Miller, his former associate Christian Dawkins, and his agency ASM Sports. So at least 20 Division I college basketball programs are involved. At least 25 players, probably more, are involved in this bribery kind of scheme, getting paid for with meals by one Christian Dawkins, who has already been arrested. He was arrested back on September 26th for wire fraud and bribery. This is a developing story. There's a lot of layers to it, and joining me now is college basketball analyst Brian Ralph to break it all down. Brian, do appreciate you coming on to discuss what a bombshell report that came out, I believe, minutes before 6 a.m. on Twitter via Yahoo Sports. When you're reading all this, Brian, I want to get your initial reactions.
Initial reaction isn't necessarily one of surprise because we knew whenever stuff started coming out about the investigation, it was going to be big. It was going to include some of the biggest names in the sport. I think the more surprising factor of this is the amount of current players that are involved in this and potential eligibility questions they may face going forward as we head into March with the NCAA Tournament right around the corner.
I talked about it. At least 20 Division I basketball programs, Brian. We're talking about Duke, Kentucky, Michigan State, a lot of players that we'll get into later in the show as well. But in terms of ASM Sports and Andy Miller and Christian Dawkins, who appears to be at the middle of all of this, what do we make of this agency here, and does this lend us to believe that there could be other agencies involved? Because a lot of these players, well, safe to say, did not sign with these agencies and could be getting paid off by other agencies out there.
Right. A lot of the documents that Yahoo released and obtained from the FBI's investigation show that most of these players who were listed that ASM went after didn't end up signing with ASM, which means they signed with other agencies, which means they were probably getting more money from those other agencies. Now, ASM is the centerpiece of this FBI investigation because of the people who were arrested, but they could easily go in and raid another agency's forms as well if they get the proper go through the proper legal channels to do so, and they could find, I'm sure, the same thing with any other agency. The interesting thing here is it's important to remember with just in the entire scope of the investigation that what we learned today and this morning stems from just ASM, just one agency. And most of the initial findings from the FBI when they released their initial findings back in September was dealing with shoe companies, particularly with Adidas. And the stuff that they found and was released only came from that one agency and has nothing to do with anything related to Adidas or anything related to Nike, anything related to Under Armour. So this is still just the very tip of the iceberg.
As the documents show, an underground recruiting operation, Brian. And while all of these details are coming out, there's 3 criminal cases that are kind of involved with all this. So you see some of the players on your screen here, folks, that are involved in this whole ordeal in this report here. And again, we'll get into more details about the players later. But Brian, this is like a web of confusion. As one lawyer put it in the report, there could be chaos involved because you have the criminal side. You also have the NCAA side of things and, you know, the investigation that they're going to have to go through and the eligibility of all of these players. And the NCAA, Brian, may not be able to get all of the information that they need because there's a criminal or multiple criminal cases going on right now, and some of those documents could be sealed. So is this a recipe for absolute chaos?
It's a recipe for absolute chaos. It's a recipe for something that's going to drag on for a long, long time. This is nowhere near the start of the end of this. The NCAA, as we all know, doesn't exactly move the fastest when it comes to its punishments and decisions, and with something that figures to be as widespread as this, it's going to be something that lingers for a while because, again, with both the FBI and the NCAA, they want to make sure they get everything right and get as much information as possible with regards to potential violations.
All right, folks, so I'll, throughout the program, be reading some of these excerpts from this report here. Here's one of the really interesting parts. The documents tie some of the biggest names and programs in the sport to activity that appears to violate the NCAA's amateurism rules. This could end up casting a pall over the NCAA tournament because of eligibility issues. So that's another point, Brian, because a lot of these players listed in this report are currently college basketball players. And now you have to wonder about tournament eligibility. And, Brian, we're getting pretty darn close to Selection Sunday. It's not too far on the horizon. So the NCAA has to make a few decisions pretty darn soon, right?
That'll be an interesting thing to see. Selection Sunday is March 11th, Sunday, and then the NCAA tournament will start with the first 4 games on March 13th, a couple days later. That's an extremely quick amount of time for the NCAA to make a decision on something with information they're getting, just secondhand information that they're getting just now. We've seen programs hold out players who had eligibility questions this season. Auburn didn't have their 2 best players, including Austin Wiley, a center who was going to be a first-round pick in the NBA draft. They decided to hold him out for the entire year because he was linked to the FBI investigation, those initial findings. USC held out a couple of players, including Anthony Melton, who just left the school to pursue a pro career because they were sitting him out for the entire year because of questions from the FBI investigation. It will be interesting to see if schools decide to do that. I think it's a bit of a different case at this point in the season because, again, we're so close to the end of the year, and if you're Alabama taking Colin Sexton out and sitting him over him being linked to this report doesn't do your team any favors. Same thing with Michigan State and Miles Bridges, Duke, and Wendell Carter. I don't think we'll see those programs and those players sit out now the same way we saw players and teams sit those players out at the beginning of the season. It will be interesting to see as we go through March in the NCAA tournament if those teams make a run, Alabama, Michigan State, Duke, if that will hold up over time or if it ends up being something that has to be vacated like we just saw with Louisville being stripped of the 2013 championship.
All right, Brian, let's take a look at some of the players involved in the documents here. We got Alabama, Clemson, Creighton, Duke, Indiana, all represented on this list. Colin Sexton is one name that I'm looking at. Wendell Carter, another name, the leading scorer there for Duke. So some of these guys are pretty headliner type of names. And now, I mean, I'm sure everybody's going to be monitoring their social media, monitoring their Twitter, et cetera, to see what they're going to say about this, if anything. But if you're Coach K or a coach of any of these teams, honestly, involved in all this, what do you tell these players who have been named in these documents? How do you go about this? What's the right PR move here? That's
the tough thing because, again, the easy thing will be saying just go out and play. We don't have all the facts. You're going to have to deal with it. Telling the player they have to deal with some adversity at some point in their life or professional career. This is just preparing them for that. But again, there will be calls for people who want them to sit out because they clearly have received, according to the FBI, what the FBI found, clearly have received some impermissible benefits that makes them ineligible and would jeopardize them the results of an entire team's season. So we're in a bit of a murky water here. I think we'll see different things happen on a case-by-case situation. In certain cases, where these players received more money, I think they may be more apt to sit out than others who may have just received a meal or something from ASM, and they may just, not receive think they're going to receive as strict of punishment. I don't think coaches from this have to necessarily be worried about their status or their job moving forward because this is just, again, an agency dealing with players. Coaches don't necessarily usually don't have interaction or meddling in that agent-player relationship. So in this case, coaches have some realistic deniability, but in the way they handle their players, I think we'll see that on a case-by-case basis.
And Brian, we're talking about amounts that are as high as $43,000, around that range, and then you're seeing amounts like in the 400s. I mean, But it doesn't really matter at the end of the day in terms of the amount of money that's involved. It's the principle, it's the action, it is the end result, that the fact that you bought somebody else's meal, you being the agent, i.e. Christian Dawkins in this case. And it's really amazing to me because you see here, lunch with Miles Bridges' parents, $70.05. That could be slapped down as an NCAA violation, and that's why it seems like more and more players could be involved here, because anything as much as buying Miles Bridges a box of Tic Tacs could be seen as an NCAA violation. So you're seeing all these names that are involved here, and it's absolutely amazing. Diamond Stone, you saw him on your screen, folks, played at the University of Maryland. He was playing for them when I was at school there, and it's pretty crazy to see. And some USC players are involved as well. So Brian, it's interesting because the lawyer referenced in this document, or in this report here, Stu Brown, released a few words in terms of the thoughts on the matter. And Brown says the likely scenario would be for the schools to assess the credibility of what's in the documents and the severity of the potential violations. So Brian, let me ask you this, and you kind of alluded to it. Could the amount of money involved here actually make the punishment worse? So let's say we have, a Dennis Smith situation here where it's $43,000 compared to Miles Bridges' mom, $400. Could there be a differential in punishment? Or is it just, a streamlined baseline kind of deal?
If you go by the book, it would be a streamlined baseline kind of deal. But I think at the end of the road here, when everything comes out with shoe companies and agencies, more likely than not, everybody is going to be involved in some form or fashion. And so because of that, I think your baseline changes and then becomes baseline as everybody received some sort of impermissible benefit. And if that's the case, should that be the case, I think we'll then see the NCAA punish some more egregious offenders as opposed to the ones who just got, a $70 meal, or whose parents got a $70 meal. Where that baseline changes and where that NCAA decides that baseline is, well, I think will be determined by what comes out in the coming months.
I do want to harp on Brian Bowen here of South Carolina, of course, formerly of Louisville. Brian, somebody you've been following real intently throughout this entire investigation here. And, of course, Bowen was involved in the initial investigation with Louisville last fall, and then the school withheld him from competition, and he moved on to South Carolina, and it looks like he was involved with some money in terms of expenditures with plane tickets and travel, and at least $7,000 in benefits if you're incorporating his family too. So he's back in the negative headlines.
Yeah, now, we reported last month that once Bowen transferred to South Carolina had expected the NCAA to clear him to make him eligible to play the second semester of next season. They would have had to, he was enrolled at Louisville, and then he transferred to South Carolina after the first semester, so they were accounting for him having to sit out that 1 year of the transfer rule, but they were expecting him to be able to play and be cleared. With the information we have about him being paid, or his family at least being paid by Adidas for his commitment to Louisville, and then now him and his family receiving more money from agencies, I don't see there's any way that he's ever going to see college basketball court.
And folks, if you're wondering where we're getting these amounts here, so Yahoo Sports basically put out pictures of these balance sheets that list out, the money that's involved here. In Christian Dawkins filed some expense reports to ASM Sports to kind of, document what's going on and, what he had to pay for and all this stuff. So you're seeing ATM withdrawals. You're seeing things like dinner with so-and-so and all this stuff. And Brian, I feel like it's almost surreal. Like, hearing about it and the rumors and the hearsay and all this is one thing, but we've got the numbers right here. Like, Yahoo Sports came out with the balance sheets and the expenditures and all that, and it's scribbled out, and you got some X's and crosses and all that. Is this surreal to you too? Like, this is where we're at with NCAA basketball. I mean, we have the hard evidence now, at least from Christian Dawkins.
Yeah, now this is stuff that has gone on for a while, both shoe companies being involved and agencies being involved at younger and younger levels. the surreal part and interesting part to me is just how meticulous these records were that were kept by Christian Dawkins and Andy Miller and ASM. It's clear that they knew that they needed this information specifically for a reason, whether it be to follow up with these players to get specific amounts or just to sort of have. But these are very, very meticulous records that are being kept and are turning out to be one of the big factors driving the investigation. It's just the amount of detail in this.
So while all this is going on, and it seems like the NCAA has to make some decisions pretty darn soon, you got the 3 criminal cases that are going on right now, and of course Christian Dawkins has already been arrested, so I mean, and the punishment can't get much worse for him at this juncture. But how do these 2 investigations kind of coincide? You have the federal side of things and the FBI and all that, and you also have the NCAA trying to do their thing. It seems as though the NCAA is willing to kind of give the feds their space to do their thing. But are you confident that both of these 2 sides can kind of coexist and go through these investigations effectively and efficiently?
Well, I think it's very much clear that the FBI is very much in the lead on this, and the NCAA is sort of acting in a more reactionary role. They can say they're doing their own investigation, but it seems like they're very much hanging off the coattails and information that they'll get from the FBI and that comes out from the FBI investigation. As it pertains to the upcoming NCAA tournament, we'll know about the NCAA's feeling about these players' eligibility in the coming days. Because if they're still moving in that regard, I don't think we'll see anything happen to them until after the NCAA tournament. Because again, this is something the NCAA is going to want to drag out and then bring the hammer down on them right before conference tournament or right before the NCAA tournament starts. They're going to want to have this sort of nipped in the bud now. So if they decide that's the case, we'll see them make that decision in the coming days, whether it be this week and early next week, as opposed to it being a couple weeks from now at the beginning of the NCAA tournament. If nothing comes out by the end of next week, I think we're looking at them sort of hitting the pause button on this and revisiting it in the offseason.
And for folks wondering, Christian Dawkins, 24-year-old former business associate, was arrested on September 26 and faces felony charges of wire fraud and bribery in 2 of the 3 criminal cases tied to the investigation. Now, Brian, I assume we're going to get some more statements from some of these schools throughout the day, but only one school chose to release a statement to Yahoo Sports ahead of this story, and it was Xavier coach Chris Mack saying, quote, "I have no relationship with Andy Miller or any of his associates. He plays no role in the recruitment of potential student athletes on Xavier's behalf. Beyond that, our staff has never created a path for him to foster a relationship with any of our student athletes while enrolled at Xavier," goes on. And that's just one school of the many that have been listed here, the Michigan States of the world, the USCs, Kentuckys, all that. So, Brian, I assume the PR departments at all these schools are working overtime. They're probably in the office at 5 a.m. this morning to try to figure out how they're going to go about this. What do you think the strategy is? I mean, we're talking about from school president down to the head coach. How do they go about this? And you got press conferences going on perhaps today. I know Cal Perry will have a press conference at 2 o'clock Eastern today. So what's going to be the messaging? Is it going to defer? What are you predicting here?
I think it's going to end up being essentially along the exact same lines of what Chris Mack said. Agents sort of operate in the shady waters of college basketball. They know the way most coaches will react to them being there. So they talk with these players when they're away from the program on the off time and the off season. Coaches like to have everything contained on campus around their program, but these players aren't there 365 days a year. They're off playing over the summer in summer leagues when school's not in. They're everywhere, and those are the places where agents usually come into play. And because of that, coaches have a very real, they don't necessarily know which agents their players are talking to. They may have some idea or be able to or warn players against about certain things, but the agent-player interaction is almost exclusively without having a coach involved.
And we're talking about Colin Sexton here, current player for Alabama. We got Duke player Wendell Carter, current Kentucky player Kevin Knox here, some former players as well. Monty Morris of Iowa State, Malcolm Brogdon of Virginia. Did any of these names really stick out to you here, Brian? And I do want to start off with Collin Sexton here, who is a current player with Alabama, met with Christian Dawkins, who paid for a meal. And we will predicate this discussion here with saying that a general meeting with an agent is allowed, but when something is paid for, that's when you get into some trouble here. So Collin Sexton now, I mean, Alabama is in position to perhaps make the NCAA tournament. If they lose Sexton, that would be crushing, right?
It really would. He's clearly the best player. Alabama is very hot and cold, as it is anyway. They're one of the most inconsistent teams in the country. Sexton, losing him, I think, would kind of nip any chance of them making a run in the NCAA tournament. However, it should be noted that Sexton did sit out of Alabama's season opener due to the findings in the initial findings in the FBI investigation where he met with an agent. So if Alabama decides they think that punishment is enough and they think they'll be in the clear, I think you'll see Sexton continue to play. If there is some new revelation to them, which it may or may not be, they may decide differently. But I think in his case, because he sat out the season opener, I think Alabama's going to let him play and kind of see what happens from there.
All right, let's check in with Wendell Carter now of Duke. He met with Christian Dawkins as well, and according to the expense reports, he paid for a meal, and Carter, one of several current college players named, involved, and listed in this report here. So with Carter now and Duke, I mean, we're talking about Duke basketball here. Certainly will steal some more headlines than, say, in Alabama, and the loss of Carter would obviously be very detrimental to Duke's March Madness chances, right?
Absolutely. They're already dealing with Marvin Bagley, another projected lottery pick, who's missed the last 4 games with a knee injury. So to lose Wendell Carter, their second projected top 10 pick, and other quality big man, they would essentially be extremely short on depth and be extremely small up front without really any big guys. So obviously Duke, for a program like Duke, the bigger picture and bigger concern is the image of the program, what may happen to the program down the road, than what may happen in any one particular NCAA tournament. But looking ahead, if Carter were to miss any time, they would need Bagley back healthy, or they'd be looking at some real concerns about their chances.
A totally kind of new discussion here, Brian, because when you read stuff like this, it almost makes you angry when you see $70.05 could be an NCAA violation. So we have a reaction poll for the folks at home, and it brings up the debate, should college athletes be paid? Give us a heart for yes, a like for no, and Brian, I'm telling you, the NCAA could avoid a lot of headaches if they went in that direction, just paying the players, but that'll never happen, will it?
Not in the aspect of them having a salary. I've been an advocate for keeping the college system the way it is, with the exception of allowing college athletes to benefit off their likeness and benefit from being them and their work just like any other student is. And that's the way, when it comes to paying players, the major detractors will point against, well, do you pay all football players the same when the quarterback may not be as important, as valuable as the third-string center? Do you pay swimmers and divers and non-revenue sport athletes the same as you would pay football and basketball players? The answer to all that is no, because their value is not the same.
Right.
And so how do you solve that? You allow them to make money on the side and benefit from their likeness, just like any other college student would be. There's I think we'll see the super strict restrictions that pertain specifically to athletes. I think we'll see those fall before we start seeing anybody get a salary from the school or the NCAA.
Get the podcast version of the Cam Rogers Show. Head on to chatsports.com/Cam Show. Download for iPhone users. Leave a review, subscribe, download, all that good stuff.